Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing exactly that, a deep dive into, well, the really complex world of child consent guidelines and the legal frameworks around them. We're pulling all our insights directly from the source material you've shared with us. It's quite intricate stuff, covering different age groups, competency levels. It's especially critical knowledge in healthcare settings.
That's right. Our aim here is to sort of walk through this material together. We want to pull out the most important points, really help you grasp the key nuances in the legal side of things for different ages based on these sources.
Okay, great. Let's unpack this straight away then. The sources jump right into how rules change with age. What's the first big distinction the material makes?
Well, what's really striking is how the law and guidelines, as presented here, draw some pretty clear lines. So for patients under 16, the sources say they might be able to consent. That's if they're considered competent. Often linked to the Fraser Guidelines we can discuss. But UT, and this is a big but in the material, they cannot refuse treatment if it's thought to be in their best interest. That's a crucial point for this age group.
Okay, so they might consent, but can't refuse if it's best for them. What about older kids?
Right. Moving up, those between 16 and 18, well, they are presumed competent to consent. That's the default assumption. And then patients 18 and over have full autonomy. As you'd expect, they can consent or refuse freely. So you see these quite distinct legal statuses tied to these age brackets.
Yeah, that difference for under 16s is definitely where it gets complex, and the sources focus there. They mention specific guidelines for contraceptives for under 16s, the Fraser Guidelines. What are the key criteria the sources pull out?
Yes, the Fraser Guidelines. The sources list 5 main points a professional needs to weigh up. Things like, does the child actually understand the advice? Are they reluctant to tell their parents? Also, how likely are they to, be sexually active anyway? Is their physical or mental health at risk without contraception? And ultimately, the big one is providing it actually in the child's best interest. It shows that careful balance the sources describe.
Right, a real balancing act. Now, the GMC guidelines also get a mention in the material. Do they line up with this? And what do the sources say about that tricky situation, a competent child under 16 refusing treatment?
Yeah, the GMC guidelines mentioned seem to reinforce this. They agree that 16 and overs are presumed competent. And for under 16s, they echo that they may have capacity depending on their understanding, which, like you said, leads straight to that challenging question the sources tackle.
Right.
What if a competent under 16 says no? And here, the material points out a really key difference depending on where you are in the UK. In England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, a competent child's refusal can actually be overridden, either by someone with parental responsibility or by a court order. But the sources highlight it's different in Scotland. There, a competent young person's refusal, if they are 16 or over, cannot be overridden by parents. That geographical split is vital.
Okay, so that location difference is crucial, and competency itself is obviously central here. How do the sources describe figuring out if a child is competent or has capacity? And is there a difference between Gillick and Fraser competency according to the material?
Well, capacity, as the sources explain it, is about being able to understand the relevant information, make a decision based on it, and then communicate that decision. Simple as that sounds, it's complex in practice. The material also clarifies, importantly, that things like learning difficulties don't automatically mean someone lacks capacity. And it stresses that competency develops over time. If a child isn't competent, then yeah, parental consent is usually needed.
And Gillick versus Fraser.
Right, so Gillick competency, based on the sources, seems to be the broader term. It refers to under 16s having enough understanding and maturity to consent to medical treatment generally. Fraser competency, while sometimes used the same way, is often linked more specifically, according to this material, to decisions about contraception, and maybe slightly wider consent contexts for younger children, stemming from that specific legal case.
Got it. The sources cover a few other areas, too. Parental responsibility, emergencies, immunization, even research. What stands out there?
Yeah, a few quick points. Parental responsibility is basically the mechanism the sources outline for giving consent when a child can't. In emergencies, the material says third parties can consent if it's clinically justified, in the child's best interest. For things like immunization, the sources suggest implied consent is often enough.
And research. That sounds like it could be tricky.
It has a very specific role highlighted in the sources. For therapeutic research, research that might actually help the child consent can come from the child if competent or someone with parental responsibility. Pretty standard. But T, and this is the key bit from the sources, for non-therapeutic research just for general knowledge, no direct benefit to the child's own consent is needed. Doesn't matter about their age or what parents think. The child has to agree. That's a really specific point the sources make.
Wow, okay, so pulling this all together, what's the big picture from this deep dive into the sources? It seems incredibly nuanced, doesn't it? This balance between age, understanding parental rights, the child's welfare, plus those legal differences by location.
Exactly. It's precisely that complexity. Understanding Gillick and Fraser competency as laid out here, knowing those age cutoffs and what they legally presume, recognizing when refusal can be overridden and when it can't, and definitely remembering that specific rule for non-therapeutic research, those are the absolute core takeaways from this material.
It really underlines the need for very careful individual assessment in every single case. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on, based on everything we've drawn from these sources. How do these detailed, sometimes quite complex guidelines actually translate into practice? How do they impact trying to achieve genuine shared decision-making with young people and their families in a busy clinic? Something to think about.
Definitely keep digging into these vital areas. It's complex, but so important.
This has been really insightful. For those of you preparing for exams or just wanting to solidify your knowledge on topics like this, remember resources like passmsra.com and freemsra.com can be valuable tools.